Hi there folks, in today's video I'm going to talk about solutions with regards to Power Automate Cloud Flows. I'm going to have a look at how to convert your personal flows into solution aware flows, the benefits that brings, like being able to use drafts and versioning and publishing, and also connection references, but also what is an unmanaged solution versus a managed solution and what you need to be thinking about with regards to different environments. So let's get started and jump into the demonstration. So I'm going to kick things off from Power Automate by building out a basic flow with a manual trigger. And the reason I'm doing this is I want to show you some of the screens that you might never have considered before and why they're important, and therefore where solutions might come to help you. So I have the start of a manual triggered flow, and I'm going to add in the simple action of sending an email. And the reason I'm adding send an email is it uses a connection, and one of the advantages of solutions are connection references, and we can have a look at that later on. But I'll complete the details here and add in some body data, and I now have a very simple flow manually triggered that sends an email based on my connection reference. I own that flow, it will run as me. Now the first problem you might encounter is you've built this on behalf of someone, you're a development team, and you want to pass on that ownership to someone else. You've built this as a personal flow. You can see the top right, I've built this in the default environment as well. And actually, if I pop that open, should I have built that in my dev environment so that it can then move into the test and then into the production? And that might all sound a bit too advanced, so maybe that's not your use case, but ultimately that's what solutions allow you to do. They allow you to package up your various flows related to a department or a system and then move them between different environments. And if you're building everything in your default environment right now, you're leaving those apps and flows vulnerable. If someone leaves, who's going to take over that ownership? Maybe it's time you start thinking about using solutions, get yourself an environment for at least your development and testing, and then deploy to production. Now, if I click back to end up on the details pane, we can see that I am the primary owner of the flow. And we can also have a look at the type of flow, which is important. It's an instant flow, which ultimately means that anyone that triggers that flow will need to have a license. And you can see the plan, the user who runs the flow identifies that because the flow is instant, anyone that runs that flow must have a license for this. The other thing to note is we have no diamond at the top right here, and I'll add in a premium connector and we can see that arrive later on. Now at the moment, none of this really relates to solutions, but by looking at this screen, if I scroll down, we can see there is no solution pane. And when I eventually convert this flow into a solution aware flow, we'll see a change to this details pane. The other interesting feature to call out here is the run only users feature, which if I go into edit, it allows me to decide if the connection is based on the run-only user, i.e. because this is an instant flow and it could be one that's triggered by a Power App, is it based on the user who runs the flow because it's instant, or is it a fixed connection, i.e. does it always run as me? This run-only feature is only available for instant triggered flows. And so you'll see run-only users disappear when I update the trigger later in this demonstration. The other thing is, the set primary owner button here, you'll see it's grayed out. I'm unable to change the primary owner. And whilst this is not important for a flow necessarily that's run as an instant flow, because it's based on the license of the user that runs the flow, if it was based on an automation or a schedule, then the licensing would change and it would be based on the owner of that flow. And quite often you'll see service accounts being used for that scenario and then licensed with either a premium or a process license. So as a personal flow, I can't change the owner. As a best practice, you probably want to share your flow with multiple users. So I can share that flow with Alistair here. But when I go back to the details pane, I still remain the primary owner. And if I attempt to set the primary owner, you can still see that that's grayed out. Another important thing to explore, if I go back into edit the flow, before I make this a solution aware flow, I'm going to add in a premium action. In this case, I'm just going to get a row from a table, which I'll do from the Dataverse action, which is of course premium. I'll select any table for this demonstration and put in 1 is the ID. But again, this particular action will be using my personal connection, which means if I need to change that, I need to come back into the flow to edit it at a later date. But also I'm going to update this manual trigger. So because this flow at the moment is manual, if I change this to a recurrence in this case, by changing it to recurrence, I've now changed the licensing model for this particular flow. And if I go back to the details pane, we can see top right, we now have the diamond next to the name of the flow. It's become a premium flow. The type has now changed to scheduled because I changed the trigger, and it now, as a result of that, runs on the owner's plan. And so because it now runs on the owner's plan, this flow will run as the primary owner, who is me. And of course, if I'm building all the flows for the organization and all the flows are either scheduled or they're based on an automated trigger, then all of those API calls will go against my license. A seeded license will have 6,000 API calls in a 24-hour period. A premium will have 40,000 and a process will have 250,000, albeit you can buy additional via an add-on. And had I used solutions, it would be very easy for me to change the primary owner of this flow, as well as changing all the connections in my flow too. Now, if this was a live video, I'd be asking for a raise of hands right now. Who has had this situation where they want to change the owner? What have you done? Let me know in the comments. Did you send a copy of that flow to someone else? And then by sending a copy, you then disabled or deleted this flow, and then they created their own version of the flow and that became the active flow. Or maybe you've used the export feature and used the package zip here and created a zip file, which is a zip for that single flow. Well, the concept of solutions is about multiple flows, multiple apps, environment variables, connection references, and we're now going to have a look at how we can convert this flow into a solution-aware flow, which will then allow you to change the primary owner, but also easily move that flow between your development, your test, and your production. So if I jump across over onto solutions, you can see I've got a series of solutions in this environment right now. This is my practice environment, and I can create a brand new solution at the top left, and I can give that a display name. So this will be all of my finance automations, and it is worth considering how you break down your solutions. That's another topic for another day, but ultimately you don't want to pack everything into your solution, because of course every time you want to move that solution between your dev, test and your prod, that there are no dependencies between those various flows and apps. But if I move forward onto publisher, we've got a default publisher, but you can create your own publishers, and you'll see here I've created a DemoBird 365. Now that helps me identify who built this solution. So if you have a team of developers, you might want to have your own name for your solutions that you've built. And the advantage of that is when you create a new publisher, not only do you give it a display name and description, you also give it a prefix. And so here, if I was to do db365, you can see the sample at the bottom here, db365_object. All of your different objects that you create within the Power Platform via this solution, whether that be tables or environment variables, the system name will be prefixed by db365. So again, it makes it very easy to identify who has built these solutions and who has built all of these various objects, your flows, your apps, your tables, etc., and brought them into your environment. Go running after them with a pitchfork. So if I now create my new solution, we've not really touched much on what solutions are, but this is where I bring out my prop. It is a cardboard box. And what I've done right now is I've built an unmanaged solution. And that unmanaged solution is totally empty. There's nothing in it. But what I can do now is I can start adding flows and apps and connection references and environment variables and anything you can possibly think of into that open box. It is an unmanaged solution, and I can add and edit as much as I want in this particular environment using this particular solution. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to convert that flow that I built as a personal flow into a solution aware flow. And by adding an existing flow, we can see I already have some flows down the side here that are already solution aware. But if I go to the outside Dataverse tab, whilst I was very much hoping my new flow would appear at the top, if I scroll to the bottom, I can see my basic flow that I created 7 minutes ago is there, and by adding it, it will convert this flow into a solution-aware flow. It will also do two other things. If you pay attention to the left-hand side here where there's a filter on the solution, it shows how many different objects I've got in there, of which I've got none. but shortly we will see at least one cloud flow appear in there, but also we should see connection references appear too. And just like magic, we now have the one cloud flow and two connection references. Now there are definitely pros and cons of doing it this way. By converting my personal flow into a solution-aware flow, the solutioning tool has conveniently named my connections for me, but had I been prepared and known that I was going to be building a flow, I actually would have started from within a solution rather than from make.powerautomate.com, and I would have gone to new and then into automation cloud flow and chosen the type of trigger that I wanted to build as a result of building out that flow. But even before doing that, I might have actually considered the various connectors that I'm using, which then would have allowed me to go down to the more, choose connection reference, and then I could create a connection reference with a specific name. So if you were following best practices and creating connections based on specific display names, maybe you wanted to reference that with your particular solution somehow, your particular process. This is the invoice process and it's for the Outlook connector. You can see by giving it a display name, we get that system name, which is prefixed by my solution, the DB365, so someone will be able to easily identify that I have created that connection reference. I can add a description to help someone going forward, and then when it comes to the connector, you can see I have all of these lovely connectors, and if I was to search for Office 365 Outlook, I can choose that connector, I can choose my connection, in this case it's based on me, I can create a new connection, I can equally use a service account, but what it does mean is I can update this outside of my flow. So I could have 10 flows all using this same connection reference, and rather than having to go into that flow to update it, which you shouldn't do anyway in production, I can do so from this particular connection reference. And if I create this, we will see our new connection reference called the invoice process Outlook connector. Now if we go and take a look at the details pane of our flow, so clicking on the ellipsis and going to details, see my flow has run several times and maybe shouldn't have chosen a recurrence. The first thing to notice over on the right hand side is we now have a solutions pane, and we can see that this particular flow is part of the finance automation solution. And the other thing is it a managed solution? No, it's not. It's unmanaged. Does anyone remember what an unmanaged solution is? It's that open box. The other thing to notice is the owner is still me, but if I go to set primary owner, you'll see that that ability to set the primary owner is now unlocked. And actually, it's Alistair that's licensed for this particular process because he's not actually a person. He is a service account, and quite clearly he's a service account that I haven't yet licensed because he doesn't have a premium license. And had Alistair been licensed for a premium license, by saving this would then update the primary owner of the flow, which would mean that this flow would then run on the plan of that new owner. Because this is a scheduled flow, the same applies for your automated flows. So jumping back over onto the solution, now we've understood how to convert a flow from a personal flow into a solution-aware flow. If we go in to edit the flow, there's one other slight change. If I click on the send an email action, we can see that it's now using connection references. And so here we can see it's using the Office 365 Outlook Finance Automations AF2AB connection reference. But I created my own connection reference. I called it the Invoice Process Outlook Connector. And of course, if I'd created my connection references in the solution prior to creating the flow, then I could have selected these when building the flow and then use my naming convention. And you can see it's very obvious that this is for the invoice process. It's the Outlook connector. It's no longer attached to a personal connection, which is what you get when you build out a personal flow. The same applies to the Dataverse action. It's using that newly created connection reference, which is part of our solution, and we'll see why that's important when I export the flow. The other thing to note, which is quite interesting, you might have seen on some of my videos and wondered, why has Damien got a save draft and a publish button? Well, it's because I build my flows in solutions, and by doing so, I get a save draft, which means that any changes I make, are not live. If I could just quickly interrupt your video watching, if you're enjoying this and haven't already, please make sure you like and subscribe. Not only will it help the channel, it'll also raise awareness of the content I've been producing over the last 3 years. If you've got a comment to add, please also do that too, but I'll let you get back to the video. Cheers. And I have a publish button, which means that when I publish those changes, the current version goes live. And that's very important as well when it comes to exporting your solutions, because if you're saving as draft and then you want to move this flow into production or into your test, you need to publish those changes. But what it also gives you is a version history. And we can see in the version history, if I expand that, the changes I've made over the last few minutes to this particular flow. And so whilst this history is pretty uneventful right now because it's only been a solution for a few minutes, if I was to jump out of the history and add in a compose, of course one of my favourite actions, and put in some inputs there, and if I publish those changes, I might think to myself that actually I didn't want that compose, or maybe I've deleted that compose and wish I could go back to the previous version. Well, I've got version history now, and by popping open that version history I can look at previous versions which didn't include the compose, and you'll see also that I have a restore button in the top right hand corner. So I can hit restore and I can actually restore back to that previous version. And now my latest version is the version without the compose. So again, a show of hands, who's deleted something in Power Automate and then thought, if only there was a way to restore that flow? Well, there is. You can use versioning by using solutions. So lastly, what I'd like to do is I'd like to jump back into my solution and show you how we can move it between different environments. And so at the moment I'm working away in my practice environment, which is probably bad practice if you're building anything that is for anything but yourself, and most organizations will try and push you into strategic environments based on what their policy is. So maybe you've got an environment per department or maybe per project. But if I pop this window open, you can see I've got a dev, I've got a prod, I've got a test. And if I wanted to move this particular solution into my dev, which is where I make changes, I'm going to need to be able to edit those flows. And this is where the importance of understanding managed versus unmanaged comes into play. If I was in my test or my prod environment, then I'd be looking to use a managed solution. And a managed solution is not something I've yet talked about, but if I bring out my box, it's now closed. Imagine I've got a roll of duct tape and I put that duct tape across the box. It's now a managed solution. Everything that I've put in that solution is now in that box, and when it moves across, you can't directly make changes to anything within that box. The only way you can make changes is to go back to your development environment, make changes to the unmanaged solution, and then export the solution and import it into your production or test environment. I say it's the only way. You can also make changes directly on production, but that creates unmanaged layers and is going to really mess with your ALM process, as it's known, your application lifecycle management, without trying to get too scary with acronyms. But ultimately, the process of moving your apps between your development, your test, and your production is known as ALM. And if you start allowing people to edit those production solutions, then when it comes to actually physically moving your developed solutions from your development to test or production, you're going to hit errors with unmanaged layers. Now back onto this particular solution, if I publish all customizations, which means all those draft changes are now going to be made live on my flow. Remember, this is my practice environment. This is in effect my development environment. If I jump back to the Solution Explorer, I can see my finance automation solution. Publisher is DemoBird 365. And if I select that solution, I can now export it, which will not only include my flow, and it could be multiple flows and multiple apps, it also includes those connection references. Now, as I work through the wizard, I get to use versioning. I can choose if I want to export as a managed or unmanaged, and hopefully now you can understand why we had that important cardboard box feature throughout the video. The managed, as you can see, is recommended. That means that that particular solution is closed. You can't make changes unless you're going to be naughty and create unmanaged layers. And this would be the recommended approach if you are going to be deploying this to your test or your production. But maybe you built loads of flows on your personal practice environment and actually you want to get a copy of those in an editable state. You want to be able to make changes to those flows and maybe even possibly remove the flows that you have on your practice environment, because ultimately you'd like to get a copy of them, move them into your development environment as unmanaged, start working on the unmanaged solution within your developer environment, and then from that new developer environment you can export as a managed solution into your test and into your production. Now if I export as managed, we'll need to wait a couple of minutes whilst this process plays out, or in my case about 20 seconds because it's quite a small solution. But I can now download that zip file like you would do for personal flows, and if I switch environments I can go across into my production environment now. We can see that my production environment only has a selection of existing solutions which have been installed by default publishers, Microsoft Dynamics 365. But if I go to import solution and browse for that zip file that I've just downloaded, which is the Finance Automations 1001 managed solution, and open that, when I work my way through the wizard, one of the first things it's going to ask me is who is going to connect to these various connection references. And of course these connection references are inside my flows, and by updating these connection references with my service account or with my personal account or however I choose as a user, they'll be pulled through into my flows because ultimately they are references. So as I import my solution, again I'll need to wait a couple of minutes, or in this case about 20 seconds again, but we can now see that my finance automation solution is in. We can see who the publisher is. We can see it's a managed solution, yes, so therefore I can't make any changes other than some unmanaged layers. There's even a pop-up to let me know that I cannot directly edit these objects because it's a managed solution. And if I attempt to edit this flow, you'll see that there's a little banner there to say that the flow cannot be updated because of the managed properties of this particular solution. So the last thing to mention, if I jump back into that solution, is you can add and remove various objects from your solutions. And if I was to go and select this Outlook Finance Automations connection reference, I could hit remove, and you'll see I've got the option to either remove from this solution or delete from this environment. So by removing from the solution, it's an open box, you can chuck things in and remove them as you please. If I remove them from this solution, all it means is it's no longer in that open box. If I delete it from this environment, then yes, you've guessed it, it's gone entirely. So if you do decide to work on a strategy for your solutions, how are you going to break them down so that you can move them across between the environments? Maybe you'll have a solution per particular application that you're building, or maybe you'll have solutions based on the different types of objects and have solutions for your flows and solutions for your apps. If you do add an object by accident, then you can use the remove. Just be careful when choosing to either delete or remove from the solution, which I'll do here. Whilst that flow has gone, I can go back into add existing. I can go into my automation and cloud flows, and we can see that my basic flow that was previously outside of Dataverse and was a personal flow is now a solution aware flow, and I can very quickly add that back into my solution, export it as a managed solution, and publish it into my production environment.